Hi, everyone. I'm Mike with Loft Labs, and I'm joined today by Satish. And today we're going to be talking about infrastructure testing workflows using vCluster and GitOps. And with that, let me go ahead and hand it off to Satish. How are you doing today? You want to introduce yourself and let everyone
Hi,
know
Mike.
about?
Thanks. Hi, everyone. This is Satish. I work at Luminar Technologies. I help engineers make their infrastructure feel so much better and easy. So I solve very hard problems for them and support them in all the infrastructure deployments and solving those day-to-day, the struggles that they face with the infrastructure.
Awesome.
Thanks.
Well, let's say welcome everyone again. Let's go ahead and dive right in. Looks like you've got some presentation materials for us and then a demo and some other cool stuff. So excited to learn about vCluster and GitOps. Oh, and
Sure.
if everyone has questions too, make sure you post questions in there and we'll be fielding some questions and stuff too, because this might be new to some people.
Sure. So this is a big topic. So trying to make it, I think, talking about the challenges of infrastructure testing, I'll skip the part of, building the infrastructure part. There are many ways how we can build the infrastructure as code, which is pretty common nowadays. And for this webinar, we'll be considering an infrastructure that is built using infrastructure as code tool and GitOps. So for GitOps, we'll be using Argo City. For the IAC, we'll be using Crossplane, which is quite similar to Terraform, but Kubernetes way. All of this will be in the Kubernetes environment and AWS Cloud. So coming back to the main challenge here with any infrastructure, be it your infrastructure as code or normal infrastructure, is how do we test? How do we test the infrastructure changes? Engineering teams have already figured it out how they're gonna test their code, but when it comes to integration with the infrastructure pieces, they want to be able to test their infrastructure changes as well. This is a very normal expectation from every engineer that whatever they test, their application is good, and the infrastructure that it is going to be deployed onto is also working as expected and not face any last minute issues in production. So we'll be talking about the challenges for an infrastructure engineer or an engineer. How do I test the changes? Especially in GitOps, this is very important because GitOps is you do a git commit to your main branch, and everything that is deployed in that main branch or committed in main branch gets deployed onto the infrastructure. So now the need here is how do I make the changes and not commit into main branch, but be able to test it on a similar setup or similar infrastructure elsewhere, or maybe on the different account to make sure all the changes are tested. So the common challenges that we face here, the top ones for any infrastructure engineer is I want to have a immutable infrastructure to test everything. And it has to be very identical to the production environment that we have. How do we do that? How do we integrate that into GitOps workflow? Earlier, you could, if manual testing, you could go and deploy application into a separate EKS cluster or separate LOS account and test it out and confirm that everything's working well. But in GitOps way, you have a lot of immutable infrastructure, a lot of dependencies that needs to be managed. How do we replicate all of that? And it could be a pretty complex task to set up everything separately. It could mean creating multiple GitOps repositories for each environment. So how do we keep one GitOps repository, keep making changes to it, but before committing to the production environment, which is a main branch, I want to test it on some other environments. So that is one of the challenge. It can be solved multiple ways. CI option is the best one, we set up, infrastructure pipelines, build everything from ground up, and build that immutable infrastructure. It's a big task.
So you started with the promise of Docker, everything's going to be the same running everywhere and it's simple. And then all of a sudden it's gotten a lot more complicated, right? So what are some of the things that go into making it more complicated?
I think the integration with infrastructure has made it complex. Docker solved the problem of testing application locally on my system. When I make a change to the code, I can test it quick. But if I want to make sure my application is able to access S3 bucket, and I need to make sure I have the IAM role configured for it, which has those policies. And now I'm making some changes to the policy. Now, how I'm going to test that? I cannot do that locally. So I have to deploy that application somewhere, someplace in the same similar environment to test that change. So I think that is something adding more complexity to it, and just having a containerized system, a containerized application may not be enough to ensure your changes are well tested.
And then Kubernetes enters the room, and here's a bunch of CRDs that all of your engineers want to start using. So then you have to plan for that too, right?
Yes, there are many use cases. So CRD is another example, of course. You make change to CRD, you want to test it, you cannot deploy that CRD into existing production environment. So how do we test that? Then again, you need to have a separate EKS cluster, which allows you to deploy your CRD and test it out. So yeah, it is quite similar to testing the IAM role changes. So these are all, I would say, infrastructure tests that needs to be done on top of your application code changes.
Awesome.
Okay, so the second biggest challenge here, what I see is the automated validation and verification. It is very hard problem to solve. Making change to the software, or let's say the application that involves multiple infrastructure pieces, to ensure the automated validation and verification of all the changes, you have to write a lot of infrastructure tests. So you deploy an application, you need to write tests to make sure that application is able to do certain tasks that involves accessing some infrastructure. For example, in our example today, we're going to deal with a application that makes use of S3 bucket access. So here, automated expectation and test expectation here would be, I should be able to deploy an application, and that application should be able to access the data, test data from a S3 bucket and do certain tasks. So success of those tasks means all the changes that we did to IAM role or underlying infrastructure is also working as expected. So validating that and verifying it demands you to write a lot of infrastructure tests, and every application will have its own challenges, and there's nothing really much you can generalize. There will be some generalization that can be done for the automated testing, but this is a big task. Every use case will have different expectations and different challenges, but bottom line is same. Test of application plus infrastructure, both are needed. And going GitOps way solves that problem somewhat, but how do we test with the GitOps is something that needs to be really solved perfectly.
Awesome.
And the third biggest challenge is the testing cost. This is something very interesting. When we want to have the immutable infrastructure testing to test everything, how much testing is enough? That is also a question, right? I want to do end-to-end testing of infrastructure and application both. That demands us to deploy, create a separate AWS account, deploy all the immutable infrastructure needed by that application with all the dependencies, and that would cost a lot because you are running a full-blown environment infrastructure for your test, and how long it's going to run. That varies, and usually it ends up with a lot of cost that goes into your infrastructure billing. and that is a bigger challenge for all the engineering teams. They spend a lot of money into in the testing infrastructure than the production sometimes. So that is a real problem to solve. And how do we balance that? The level of testing and what are the innovative ways how we can reduce the tests, or we want to avoid building the entire immutable infrastructure from ground up for just tests for each PR maybe.
Sounds like you're hinting at vCluster or something like that.
Yes, that's right. So I think vCluster solves that problem to avoid the building entire infrastructure from ground up, and definitely certain use cases that would require immutable infrastructure is not needed. So that directly impacts the costs, and that is something all the leaderships love about, right? Saving costs. So that helps a lot here to be able to test everything that we want to test, but yet not build the entire immutable infrastructure for the testing.
I feel like that's a good way to lead with a new project. Is this is going to save us some money and save us some time. Let's try out this thing. Not, hey, this does all this cool stuff that I don't know how it works yet, but let's put it in there. All right, awesome. So what so I know with your demo, I don't want to give away what we're going to do, but with the demo, like what kind of stuff are you storing in S3 buckets, right? Like what kind of stuff are you, like his models, like all kinds of new stuff?
Yeah, it could be literally anything. And I think I picked a generic use case of any application. It could be data processing application that is part of an AI ML, for example. It has to read data from S3 buckets, process the data, and generate a new output on it, and then store that back into the S3 bucket. And we are talking about huge amount of data. So all of that data needs to be accessed securely, processed securely, and then put into the right location securely. And we want to make sure the application has all the necessary permissions, the access and availability of the infrastructure to do all of that task. So it could be there are many use cases. So for this webinar, I picked that one because that kind of is well understood for the majority of the audiences. That it's pretty common nowadays to have a application or a job that access the S3 bucket and then process it down.
Yeah, I think most of the time when I'm thinking GitOps, I'm not necessarily thinking about permissions and stuff like that. I'm thinking about just updates to like an application. So that's a very interesting like use case. Like you do something in a POC and it's just open, and then it moves into production, and you need to be able to test changes quickly and lock stuff down, stuff you may have missed going from POC to production. So can't wait to see your demo.
Yeah, absolutely. The GitOps is GitOps actually makes it easier to make changes to your infrastructure and achieve the infrastructure as code coverage. So your entire infrastructure is immutable, even the production. Only the data is important, nothing else. And you can rebuild everything from scratch if something happens to it. That is the benefit of the GitOps. So your entire code is in a repository, and but that also presents a challenge that when you want to test, you want to commit new changes, you have to test. And how do we test that? So this is going to be common for all the use cases that deals with some level of infrastructure pieces that it depends on. So testing that with expectation of IAC and GitOps presents different set of challenges for testing workflows.
Awesome. And we had a question, will the demo be available somewhere? So after we're done, like maybe we can post it. Is it publicly available so someone can take a look and try it on their own? Or
yeah, absolutely. So to prepare for this webinar, I created a demo repository, which is a GitOps that has everything in there. It is still private right now. I'll be cleaning it up and posting it so that everyone can just go and build their infrastructure in their personal AWS account and give it a try and see everything in action themselves. So whatever we're gonna do in this demo, everyone should be able to do that once that repository becomes public.
sounds great.
Okay.
And like I said, feel free to ask questions while we're doing this. Like I'm going to ask the questions to get Satish to expand on stuff. Like I may ask wrong things and try to get you to describe things a little bit better. Thanks so much for describing GitOps to everyone. See what's next.
Okay, so next, what I want to do is get into the demo directly. So I will start off with explaining what we got, so that everyone is familiar with what we have here. So what you're looking at is a GitOps Git repository. It's called as GitOps Infra Demo, and this repository has everything to build the entire infrastructure for an application from ground up. So what are we deploying? What I'm deploying with this repository? I'm deploying the EKS cluster. I'm creating IAM roles that are in AWS resources that are needed by EKS, and then a bunch of applications that are goodies for EKS cluster. You want to have ingresses, for example. So maybe we can show right here. Yeah, here we can see what I'm deploying. I'm deploying all these applications, or maybe I can show Argo CD view here. So I'm not sure if everyone is familiar with Argo CD, Flux. This is the GitOps way of doing things. When you make any change to the GitOps repository, Argo CD picks those changes and applies those changes to applications and infrastructure. So here, not just the Argo CD is at work. There's another application called as Crossplane, which is quite similar to Terraform. So using Terraform, you create those resources. You run Terraform plan command and Terraform apply. Similarly, Crossplane works in a Kubernetes way. It takes the changes from Argo CD. Argo CD delivers those changes to Crossplane, and Crossplane then takes those infrastructure changes and goes and applies to the AWS. So what does that mean is if I make a change to an IAM role in the GitOps repository, Argo CD picks that change, delivers it to Crossplane, and Crossplane then creates the necessary resources or updates the resources in AWS. So this is kind of dual purpose, GitOps for application as well as infrastructure.
So if I'm just, sorry,
Mm-hmm.
if I'm just getting started with GitOps, like I need to, and I'm using Kubernetes, Argo CD is somewhere that I start. Like I should start looking at tools like this, or where would you start? Like if day one?
Yep. So without a Argo CD-like tool, GitOps is not going to work, right? Because when you make a change to Git repository, someone has to take that change and apply it to your applications or infrastructure. So Argo CD here, in our case, is helping us do that. So Argo CD is monitoring any change that happens to GitOps repository, and then when that change happens, it takes that change and applies it.
Awesome. Thank you. That's perfect.
Okay. All right. So as part of the demo, what I had to do was create a environment that has a Kubernetes cluster, because our infrastructures, including Argo CD, Crossplane, all of that needs to be deployed there. So what you see here is Argo CD managing itself. So the view here is this Argo CD GitOps Infra Demo application, and this application is linked to this repository. And here you can see everything that you see on the left side under deploy is visible here in the Argo CD view, which is really good view here. All these applications are either supporting applications or the applications that engineers would care about. So all of these applications together are making all of this work today, which is pretty common for any Kubernetes cluster and GitOps setup. I will not go into a lot of details here. This is something you can try it out, when that repository becomes public, and then you can post questions there. So using this GitOps way, I am creating everything, all the infrastructure in AWS. I'm creating the VPC, I'm creating EKS configurations, then installing a bunch of applications such as Crossplane for IAC, Cert Manager for certificate management, Argo CD itself, and then creating necessary other Route 53 zones to have a URL like the one that you see in the URL here in the address bar, and it has everything. Everything that is deployed in AWS is using GitOps. So this is the setup that we have now. The challenge here is now, as an engineer, I have an application that needs to be tested. In the environment. So this is my dev environment. Let's assume that this is production plus dev, or by the way, whichever the way you want to take it right now. There's only one AWS account at this moment for this demo. So testing my application is not deployed here. Let's assume that application is deployed and we want to test it. So where do we start? Now, if I make a change to the application, and that application is right here. Inside charts, I have my app. This is the Helm chart. This Helm chart deploys a application. It creates a deployment with some image that has all the business logic that needs to run, process the data. And then I'm creating a service account to associate so that this pod, the container that launched for my application, uses the IAM role, because here this pod will be running in a EKS cluster, and when that pod is running, that pod needs to access the S3 buckets. So by default, the pod will not be able to access the S3 bucket because it doesn't have the necessary permissions. So this is the EKS way of doing things. If you want to assign a IAM role to an application, you do it this way. You add a annotation to the service account of that pod, and you specify the role name for it. So what does that mean is we are not only deploying an application here, but also deploying all the infrastructure pieces along with it. So this is a wrapper module, or you can say a full application with all the dependencies, infrastructure dependencies in it. So this is something to make sure everything is at one place, and it's much easier for all the workflows, all the tests, anything that engineer wants to do with their application. So here, application, it's commented out. I don't have the code for that, but let's assume this is the working application. And here you can see the crossplane specification that allows me to create a policy. Allow me to create a policy and a role for it. So
Satish, just to give a shout out to Crossplane too. So what is Crossplane doing? Like, for people that aren't aware of this, so what does it actually do here? Because people might see this and be like, well, how does this create the updates?
Yeah. So as I said, Crossplane is quite similar to Terraform. So for Terraform, what you do is you write the code for, let's say you want to create a IAM role and policy. So you write a Terraform HCL code to create that resource, and then use Terraform plan and Terraform apply commands, which allows Terraform to take that configuration and then apply it to infrastructure. Exactly the same way, Crossplane does that through YAML specifications. So you don't have to write the HCL code. You end up writing the YAML code. So this is the YAML code that is needed by Crossplane. So here you can see for provider, this is what it will take to the AWS. So here it is creating a policy. This is YAML format. It will convert into JSON, which is accepted by the AWS. And then it will create the policy by the release name. This is default name. So whatever the name of the application is, it will create that policy by that application name. And we will see that in action. We will go to AWS account to see how it ended up creating those resources.
How did the engineers you're working with like the idea of having most of the logic in the same file too, instead of having stuff separated, to use Terraform? Does this make it easier to get people onboarded?
Definitely, it makes it very easy because engineers like to not learn something new to handle the infrastructure, and so I think YAML makes it much easier for them, and seeing everything that they depend on in the infrastructure in the same chart that they are working with is really important. I think um, what helps here to the engineers is seeing everything in one location. And when they want to make changes, they are often confident of making changes in the application and in the same Helm chart, and seeing those getting applied on the infrastructure throughout the city. That is something that they really like about. With other tools, of course, they have to go to the CI jobs, wait for the CI job for the infrastructure to complete, and then deploy the application. So that is something, a lot of hassle for that, which is not the case, which is much improved here with the Crossplane. That is the biggest plus, I would say, making it easier for engineers to create the infrastructure pieces.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That answered the question that we had in the chat.
Okay. Awesome. Okay. All right. So similar to policy, what I need for allowing an application to have access to a S3 bucket, I need policy, I need a role, and attach that policy to role. The way Crossplane understands that is you create a policy. So we supply a policy statement. We supply the trust policy for the role. And this is pretty standard for any case cluster. And then policy attachment telling Crossplane that please attach the policy and the role together. So the policies will be attached to a role, and we will see that in action.
We had a question, Satish, too, which the answer is I kind of know because this is just part of your build. But do we need Argo CD to use Crossplane?
For GitOps, yes. To use Crossplane, no. You can very well deploy this Helm chart manually to the Crossplane namespace. And when Crossplane receives these specs in its namespace, it will start immediately processing it. Crossplane has its own CRDs. So there is a CRD for policy, and Crossplane is operator. It looks for those new objects for policy, right? And the moment there is a new object created for policy, it starts processing it. We will see that in Argo CD what Crossplane does to the objects that we deliver. How we deliver, GitOps is one way. You either commit into GitOps repository and then expect it to reach Crossplane, or you manually apply the spec through Helm chart or even some simple YAML without abstraction directly to Crossplane.
Perfect.
Okay. All right. So moving on in the demo, I think what we should do is let's make some changes here. So right now, I need to explain about the testing as well. So for the testing, let's think about the test that I want to do here. The use case here is I have this Helm chart, and I received a input from my security team saying that, hey, the policy that you have is not following the least privileges model. You cannot have wildcards here. So the change that I want to do is, comment it out, comment this one, the action with the wildcard in it, and have specific permissions to access the S3. Now my challenge here is I don't want to commit this directly in main and break the application. I want to test it first. I want to make sure these permissions are enough and I don't need to add any additional permissions. The application log will tell me whether application is able to access and do what is required to do. But at least I know that for my application to read stuff, these permissions should be enough, but I'm not sure. I'm going to test this. So the challenge here is test these changes without committing into my GitOps repository. So these changes will be on my branch. I have already created a branch. We are not on the main branch. We are in our GitOps branch. And what we will doing is testing these changes through our PR. We will be creating a pull request with these changes and test that in the same EKS cluster where this application is supposed to get deployed. So let's get to it. Before, are there any other questions in the chat that I should answer before moving on?
So I had a question for you. This is you've got this opened up in code spaces right now, right? Like you just
Yes,
opened
that's
this up
correct.
your branch. Right. We'll have to get you on DevPod eventually, but awesome. So you just hit code spaces and you've got, you know, this remote development environment, and this is how you're making the updates real quick. All right. So
Yes.
just so people know what we're looking at.
All right. Yeah. This is code spaces. It was much easier. So just click the button and open it. Okay.
Perfect.
All right. So what we want to do is let's do a commit here. So the change that we made was follow the security guidelines, not have this star. Maybe we will just remove it, and maybe keep it just for reference. And this is the change that I want to test. And this change is not visible here in the main branch right now. So if I go here, the values, I have not committed that change yet. So it is still the same. I'm going to commit this. Okay, so this is right here. I like command line better than the UI. I will do git status. Add charts. These are the only changes. Now I'll be doing a commit here. My app testing updated S3 policy for this page. Okay, so I'm going to do a git push now, and there you go. Our change is in our branch. So if I go back here, I should be able to see the change here. I have a new branch here, test my app. So main branch is still without the change here. My test branch has the change. So I'm going to go ahead, switch to my test branch, and there you go. I see my new change. Now I want to test this. This change is not live. So I will go ahead. I missed to add the production version deployment of this one, showcasing, the existing IAM role that was created with S3. So what I want to do is, create a pull request for this change. So there you go. I will leave these things for later. Before review, I will make sure I write the description and make it easier for any reviewer to understand my changes. So these are the changes I'm doing here. I'm going to create a pull request. Now, as part of this pull request, now how do I start the testing here? So I'm going to take a pause here and switch to the testing here, how GitOps PR workflow is going to work here. So in the CI test folder, you can see here I have created the test specification for my application test. And here I'm working with the labels here. So based on the labels that I create here, tests are going to run. So here you can see that the labels expected are these to handle the dependencies. So the reason why these dependencies are needed, because my app requires us to create the IAM role, and we don't want to use existing production IAM role, right? We want to create a separate test IAM role for our test. So what it requires a creation of new IAM role. And I don't want to utilize the existing crossplane because it might have security in place, which does not allow me to commit anything in main remember. So because we cannot commit in member, we probably cannot modify the existing EKS cluster. So what I want to do is modify, create a, deploy all of these changes in the new cluster. So here, rather than launching a new EKS cluster, I would go with vCluster because vCluster is pretty quick and easy to set up. So what we will be doing is launching a vCluster into existing EKS cluster, and then deploy crossplane with all the dependencies inside of that vCluster so that crossplane can pick up the changes that we deliver. Those changes will be with the policy change that we just did, and then apply using the test IAM role account, because Crossplane also needs an IAM role to connect to AWS account. Ideally, it should be a separate AWS account, but in our demo, we'll be using the same account. This test account will be restrictive with a lot of permission boundaries to make sure we don't have any security issues there, and is allowed to create only the resources that we want it to create. So a lot of pattern matching, other restrictions that will make security team very happy there. So we will be deploying all of these in sequence and see it in action through the PR.
So teach that a question. In terms of time it takes for the testing, like how much time does that save you, right? Because for EKS, what's the average time it takes you to spin up a new cluster?
20 minutes, I think.
Okay.
This is like maybe 2-3 minutes, 5 minutes max to set up.
For someone making the updates, they're very happy because they can just go look at it immediately. They don't have to walk away from their computer, go do something else, and then come back and figure out what they were working on.
Right. Yeah. And another best thing is they can launch it, and when they don't need it, they can just remove the labels and it will just go away. And for example, reviewer now wants to review it, and a reviewer wants to launch it and see it for himself or herself. Then reviewer can actually add those labels and see it in again action and review it, and then approve it. And as soon as PR is merged, all the infrastructure goes away.
Does the time help you with people not wanting to build their own? Like, a lot of developers or engineers want to build their own at home. Like, does the time that this saves, like, make them just actually use this instead of being like, I'm not going to deal with that. That's going to take forever.
Yeah, of course.
Test stuff locally.
No engineer want to build the infrastructure to test the application. If it is just a container, then they would be happy deploying their application in their local Docker container. But if it requires them to launch EKS cluster, then there are many other things. Like I need to have Minikube or K3s, K3D to launch a test Kubernetes cluster. Then they have to deal with, okay, how I'm going to test IAM role now. So I think this really helps them not worry about any of the infrastructure challenges. They just have to add labels, and their tests, they can do their test without worrying anything about the infrastructure.
Awesome.
So what we are using here is making use of Argo CD here. We are not using any CI system, traditional CI system. This is really a nice feature of Argo CD to allow you to process the pull request. So this is the pull request generator that generates the application automatically in Argo CD. So it has triggers. Labels are triggers here. The moment I create labels, this application gets activated. So if I create these labels that are specified here, this application set will get activated and it will deploy the application. And look here, what is deploying? It is deploying the Helm chart from the same repository. So we made change to values.yaml here. So this change will be tested at the moment we add these labels. So what are these dependencies here? So in the dApps folder, you can see this is also a pull request generator, and it has much lesser labels. This is to handle the sequence, basically. So all of these are sequence, part of the sequence. vCluster has to be deployed first so that we have new EKS cluster. And as part of this vCluster, there is vCluster plus here. Not only deploy the vCluster, but also make Argo CD manage the vCluster also, because all of these other deployments, they are targeted for vCluster. They are not targeted for the host cluster. So vCluster, this deployment takes care of not only deploying the vCluster, but also configuring the Argo CD to connect to vCluster automatically. And then rest of the applications, these dependencies gets deployed inside the vCluster. And this My App application also gets deployed inside the vCluster, not on the host cluster. So this gives us the exclusive environment to test our infrastructure changes and application changes. So there are many use cases. So we're going to focus on one use case today. All right, so let's see this in action. Let's go back to our PR. Now, for the CI test, I have a separate Argo CD application that takes care of CI, not this one. This is linked to the main deploy folder, which deploys everything. This is my production stuff here. So if I go back and search for CI tests, there you go, GitOps info demo tests. So this test has all the test specification. These are all pull request generators. Here you can see all the dependencies and my application, everything ready to go. So now what you're gonna see here is the moment we start adding labels here, you're gonna see the action here immediately happening. And you can notice how easy and how quick it is. My app label is already added because the change was done in the help chart of my app. So there's some automation happening here, and there's a lot of automation that you can do to make it easier.
I got it. We have a question, Satish. So the question is basically, can't test our infrastructure with this method if we're not using Crossplane. But I believe Crossplane is just a part of what you're using to automate some of the configuration for AWS. Like Crossplane isn't necessary. Like it just depends on what your stack is.
It depends on your stack. You can replace Crossplane with Terraform and still do it. The only thing is with Terraform, you have to have the CI jobs here. So you have to replace all the last piece here. So before deploying this application, you need to create a CI job that you need to link all of these dependency configurations, triggering mechanism through CI, and then you can have the control over the workflow. And as part of one of the workflow, before deploying your application, you trigger the Terraform pipeline to deploy that test IAM role changes from the repository from your branch. And then you will have similar effect as what Crossplane is doing. I like Crossplane here because it just avoids me setting up CI for myself. Everything is same. GitOps, it works with GitOps. So I'm saving some efforts and stress of managing and maintaining CI jobs here for infrastructure.
And then we have another question.
Mm-hmm.
So we have another question too. Can you explain how you've targeted the vCluster instead of the EKS cluster? Let's say for the deployment of my app. I'm not sure if you can show clusters in here without showing too much information in Argo, but it shows up as a target for Argo CD, right?
Yes, there you go. This is the location. So as part of the vCluster, it ends up launching its own Kubernetes cluster, and that Kubernetes cluster registers itself as this address in the Argo CD, and we will see that the moment vCluster is created. Let me create the vCluster. Let's see. So let me start with adding the first label, which is preview. So I want to initiate the preview because we don't want to test all the PRs, right? So preview means I want to test something, and then I will begin with dependency one, vCluster. So the moment I add those two, I should see some action here, and it should create an application. Sometimes Argo CD takes a little bit of time to get started. I can force sync it, and there you go. So it has launched a vCluster for PR2. So I'm going to open this in a new tab here and see all the things that are happening here. So Everything is unique here. You can see the name is, PR number is used here. So this will ensure that all PRs are separate. And what you see is,
I got another question to you first to teach while this is building. So a question is for a best practices question. Should crossplane be used to deploy Kubernetes resources into the cluster as well, or just external resources?
Yeah, you get to choose how you deploy your infrastructure. Not necessarily you have to use crossplane for everything. You can pick and choose. You can do part of it using Terraform and part of it using crossplane. I just prefer using one single tool for everything, so I ended up doing that using only one tool. But whenever you can replace the crossplane with Terraform for everything that is out here. Just that with Terraform, you will have to make use of CI system.
And sometimes it depends on like what your peers are used to using too, right? Like if you're been using Terraform for a long time, maybe that's what you're sticking to.
Yeah, of course, that's the case, right? So Terraform is used, has majority of market share right now. So I think um, to answer the question, it doesn't matter what IIC tool you use. The question is how you handle the infrastructure changes, whether you want to do it through GitOps. So in this example, we are doing it through GitOps. So you see application and infrastructure changes together in same Helm chart. So using Helm chart to deliver infrastructure changes. This is what it is. And Crossplane is using Terraform in the backend. So when Crossplane is creating IAM role, what Crossplane is doing is running the Terraform command for you. And the only plus point here I see, biggest plus point here I see is that I don't have to deal with the state file or any CI automation here because Crossplane does that for me. Essentially, it is Terraform underlying, just that I think Crossplane is saving me the hassle of setting up CI pipelines and managing the infrastructure through that.
So abstract away as much as you can and limit what your engineers have to do, and you'll get them on board a lot faster.
Absolutely. Yeah, trust me, engineers don't like writing SEL code and managing infrastructure. They get stressed too much. So that was one of the reasons why I switched to Crossplane because I don't want engineers to worry about infrastructure. I want it to be much easier for them to make changes to infrastructure. And Crossplane provides that. So I think that is a big plus. So here, you can see the cluster is launched and we can quickly go into settings and look in clusters. Here we go. We can see the vCluster is registered itself. It shows connection status as unknown because Argo CD will not show successful connection until unless one application is deployed on that. And we will do that right now. So I'll go back here and add next dependency, which is Crossplane. So this Crossplane application is to be deployed in the vCluster. So as I said, not necessarily it has to be Crossplane. I'm using Crossplane here, but you can very well use Terraform. But for Terraform, you don't have to do any of that, probably just configurations or run a CI job.
So are you normally doing this by hand, or just a lot of this is automated eventually, or this is part of the review process? Like someone that's reviewing, it's like, okay, I'm gonna make sure I go through each one of these labels.
For this demo, I made it manual because I want to see show everything in action. But all of this can be automated. You can have a workflow handler which adds those labels based on the validation going through each step. So that will be a GitHub action, adding a label, then connecting to the Argo CD, looking for the status. If everything is okay, then add next label. So this is kind of following the workflow, right? So all the manual actions here, all of that can be fully automated.
Perfect.
Okay, so there you go. Second application should be here. I'm going to force Argo CD to sync.
So the demo's been so interesting. We've actually gone a little bit longer with the demo than we were expecting. But yeah, if everyone has questions, keep on asking. We'll try to wrap things up, I guess, the next 10 minutes or so.
Yep, definitely. Something is not right. The demo class plane is expected here. GitOps demo. Okay, so all right, so I'm gonna go with the backup plan. The PR that I had created before for testing, I can just revive it.
Awesome. Yeah, I think just going through like what you've shown us so far gives us kind of an idea of what we're expecting. And obviously demos can break when you're going live, but I really appreciate you going through the labels, showing like each of the steps. I think that really helps out in figuring out the process.
Right. Yeah, we can quickly switch to a different one. 1 second. Yeah, this is the one. I'll go here and add labels, preview, vCluster. Looks like Argosy is not able to reach to Git repository right now. That is the only explanation that I see. Okay, all right. So we have that thing. So what I wanted to show here is, as we move through each step, what will happen is the new applications will get created. Oh, there you go. Now it worked. Even the second
There it
PR.
is.
So let's go for it.
So while we're doing that, we have a question from Dimitri too. So we spent a lot of time dealing with Argo CD and Crossplane, but not a lot with vCluster itself. Are there any demos, showing vCluster detailed? So I think the idea is that like vCluster isn't super complicated with this. Like it just kind of makes things easier, right? Like so the vCluster part was a small part, but it's actually doing a lot, right? Like it's removing the need to deploy an entirely new cluster. So
Yes.
what we've done here is we're using the same cluster. Well, if you want to describe Satish, or I can keep on. We're just deploying vCluster into EKS, right? So we do have other demos on it, and if you want more like a more in-depth dive to vCluster, I think that's something we can set up too in the future.
Sounds good. Okay, all right. So we are back in business here. Looks like Argosy managed to connect to Git repository again. So here you can see successful connection. I'm gonna, be interest of time. I'll go a little faster here so you can see Crossplane is deployed. I'll go ahead and add other dependencies as well. And it should deploy those as well. It was pretty smooth yesterday. Okay, pretty quick. The moment I add label here, it was showing up here. I'm using Spot instances, so maybe Amazon is taking away my nodes right now. But amazing that while that is happening, this is still all working well. Okay, so there you go. Ignore this part. I know why this is happening. So these are all. I don't want to talk more into dependencies here, but this is just creating configurations, and they are separate because it has to be in sequence. For the automation, we don't have to have multiple cross-plane dependencies. Just one is enough, because then you can control the sequence of resources creation.
And what you're looking at right now is what pretty much any engineer that's using Argo CD is probably doing as they're doing something. They're just refreshing, trying to sync again, refreshing, trying to sync again. This is the Argo CD experience.
Yes. Usually this doesn't happen a lot. It happens when Argosy is very busy or parts getting killed because of some underlying reason. So otherwise it's pretty quick because I have set up the webhooks. So on every change, Argo CD knows that something changed and then immediately bounces on it. Okay, all right. So we have reached this last one now. So application. Oh no, there's one more. Yep, and I can go ahead and just oh, I don't have to do the my app. It will get created. So the problem is it's a little bit slower. This should be created before this. And while Argo CD manages this part, we can go ahead and see what changes are there. And there you go. This application Helm chart has deployed. If you remember, I had commented out the deployment and only left the policy role and attachment. So here you can see it is going to get stuck because one of the dependencies is not there yet. So we will cancel this sync and sync it again the moment dependency is created here.
But like you said, your automation type stuff would probably handle this and just check for status and stuff before moving on to the next step.
Yeah, all of this is very much automated, can be automated. There's some work, creating CI, GitHub actions for handling that workflow, applying those changes. Okay, Argo CD doesn't want to deploy that yet. Okay, so while that is going on, I can answer some of the questions that may be there in the chat.
I think we got most of them so far. Thanks for all the questions. Like they've been great. I think here in the next couple minutes we can probably wrap up and say, hey, if you want to go try it out, it'll be public eventually too. We're hitting some demo slowness, but we've also spent a good amount of time on the demo, which was much appreciated. Satish, thank you so much for putting this together. It really helped me actually kind of learn like how this stuff looks, because I haven't really seen it that often, right? Like being able to walk through and say, oh, so it's just labels, and then it just deploys stuff in Argo. Seeing that connection, I think kind of helps out a lot. We can wait a minute or two and see if it finishes out. Otherwise, we can kind of wrap up and maybe get you back again sometime to show us another use case too with another demo.
There you go. It's done.
Oh, there we go.
Yep. So now we can go here and I'm going to stop this sync. Go back here, open this deployment in new tab, and just make sure CRD is created. Not yet. It's not healthy yet. Now it's healthy. Now I can go and sync here.
And so what's the end status you want? You just want this to be able to access the buckets, and then everything will kind of look okay when it comes up if it has access to them?
So here, to create IAM role, you need to have the CRDs inside vCluster, right? So the previous dependency was responsible for that. So here you can see provider IAM creates those IAM CRDs. And those CRDs, without those CRDs, these resources will not be created. So now CRDs are created. There you go. Now you can see policy and role. Now here, Crossplane is in action. So if I open this, you will see what Crossplane is doing to these resources specs. So we delivered a role specification to Crossplane, and this is the policy. And here you can see Crossplane is already at it. It is creating state right now. So the moment Crossplane is done creating it, and all of this is being done by using Terraform as a backend. So what it does is it goes to Terraform IAM module, downloads it, and then converts that YAML into Terraform code, and then runs the Terraform. So there you go. Crossplane managed to create the IAM mode here for the test. And this role policy, it should be automatic.
We had one more question too.
Maybe so, CRD is not. Yep.
Maybe some. What is the testing framework you're using?
It's nothing really. It's just YAML code here. Nothing written.
Okay.
Yeah. So Now I'm gonna go to AWS account and look for the new role that we did created as part of the test. So there you go. You can see the role that has been created. And this role was created using vCluster in vCluster plus Crossplane in its own isolated environment. And we did not use the host cluster at all.
Awesome. Success.
Success finally. Yeah.
All right, so I think that concludes the demo. I think we'll go ahead and do some outros. We've been able to spend an hour with everybody. Thank you so much for joining us, Satish. Thank you so much for putting this together too. Like it was great. Do you have any closing words or anything you'd like to say before I do the go check out something comments?
Thank you so much for the opportunity to talk about this hard problem, testing it. And what I try to do here with the example is we can make those tests test very easy using GitOps. And I try to create less that needs to be maintained. So one of the questions that was answered was, the question that I was asked, is there any test framework? I didn't use it because I chose to go a certain way that allows me to get these things done, easily. And that's what I think is the message. Simple solutions to hard problems.
Awesome. Great. All right, I'm gonna do our outro. Thanks so much for joining, everyone. Like Raul posted on there, check us out tomorrow from 10 to 11 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for DevPod office hours. DevPod is a alternative to code spaces if you're looking for something that you can actually run on your infrastructure or locally or something like that. Thanks again. Thanks for joining us, and we'll see you all next time.
Thank you so much.